Welcome to On the Middle East, Al Monitor's podcast on the big stories in the region. As the conflict between Israel and Hamas rages on, there is mounting worry about a possible conflagration that may draw in other regional actors, notably Hezbollah and Iran. The staggering number of civilian deaths among Palestinians in Gaza, including more than 4,600 children, according to the Gaza Ministry of Health, is drawing international condemnation and overshadowing Hamas's murderous rampage in Israel that ignited the current war and killed more than 1,200 Israelis. With us here to discuss the conflict and its broader ramifications is former Commander of the United States Central Command, General Joseph Votel, who oversaw the war against the Islamic State and has deep knowledge of the region. Our Pentagon correspondent, Jared Zuba, who covered that conflict, joined in the conversation today. Thank you for joining us here today, General Votel.
It's good to be with you, Amber, and thank you very much for the invitation.
So it's a really crazy time in the Middle East and very concerning time. And our Pentagon correspondent, Jared Zuba, is here with us today, and he's going to ask you the first question.
Great.
General, thanks again for joining us. I know you've been very busy.
Jared.
Just wanted to ask, we're about a month into Israel's war against Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Operationally speaking, how far along are we? I mean, from what you're seeing publicly, what comes next? And do you see signs that the IDF has been factoring in the ostensible advising by U.S. officials in terms of a scaled approach to this campaign?
Yeah, thanks. It's good to be with both of you. I think we're still relatively early on in the campaign here. Now, a lot's happened. There's certainly been a lot of strikes conducted by Israel, and of course, we've now seen the maneuvering and the movement of major forces into Gaza and down around Gaza City, and some incursions into that, and some fighting that's going on, particularly in the northern part of the country. But I assess at this point there's still an awful lot that is yet to be done, and most notably among that is, of course, the very difficult fighting in Gaza City, and I think that's all still in front of us. But then even beyond that is the harder part of this, and that is trying to take this military operation and turn it into a political solution. And I think that will ultimately be the hardest part of that. But I'm sure we might get into that a little bit more as we talk this morning. But I think it's about where I would expect this campaign to be right now. Still a lot left to do, and a lot of hard fighting before us. But clearly underway. With respect to how Israel is conducting this, I think the very strong message from the U.S. government and those that have been trying to provide advice to the Israelis is that how you do this is as important as what you do. And it's impossible not to take into consideration the humanitarian aspects of this. And I think a large part of our advice from the U.S. government standpoint was, we made some mistakes after 9/11. As we looked at the couple years of, especially the first few years of conflict after that, that I think we probably would have chose to go a different direction if we had the opportunity to do it over. So I think it's important for partners to always share that. I do think that Israel is taking some of this on. I mean, the agreement to do pauses, some of that is an example of this. I think Israel has to appreciate that a part of winning, however they define winning in this conflict has got to be their reputation on the international stage and certainly in the region. And so they have to take all these humanitarian concerns into consideration as they try to wrestle with that long term. So I think they're starting to do some of the right things here. Whether it's enough or not, I don't know. I mean, it's a very difficult situation. I think they're trying to operate by the laws of armed conflict, but it is an extraordinarily difficult situation.
Well, at the same time, though, we're hearing reports, unconfirmed for now, though, that Israel may sort of go after Hezbollah and somehow, expect the United States to join in on that front. And of course, that eventually means that Iran will somehow be part of this conflict. How concerned are you that, this may actually broaden into a conflict that does involve other regional actors, including, well, Russia, Iran, Hezbollah?
Well, of course, this has been the big concern right from the beginning, is the widening of this conflict. I think everyone can appreciate that, as a result of what happened on October 7th, that there was going to be a response here directed back at Hamas. But clearly, it's in no one's interest. It's not in Israel's interest. It's not in the region's interest. It's not in the Americans' interest for a much broader conflict across the Levant or across the Middle East. So, I continue to believe that is the case. I have been concerned over the first few weeks of the conflict here about miscalculations or missteps along the way from almost any partner here that might enlarge in the conflict, and I think we've largely avoided that for the most part, and I think that's been good. I don't know that it's necessarily in Israel's interest to go after Hezbollah right now. I think that would invite a lot more to this, that would distract from the very difficult tasks that they have in Gaza right now. So I don't think that is in their particular interest. But it's clear to me that there will have to be some addressal of the concerns across the region at the conclusion of all of this, because those things won't go away. The threat of Hezbollah onto Israel will not go away at the end of all of this, and Iran won't go away. They won't change any of their objectives in this, so there will have to be some way to reckon with that. But as far as a wider regional conflict, I think I was concerned about a miscalculation. I'm getting less concerned about that, and while I still think the possibility exists, I think it is decreasing by the day. Frankly, a little bit every day, that we are lessening the chances for a much broader regional conflict linked to this operation right here.
Well, it's pretty clear to all of us, I think, who follow this region, that Iran is absolutely not interested in escalation, even as people like Nasrallah, the Hezbollah leader, make hawkish comments about, we're going to go after you if you keep this up, sort of thing. But how does that reluctance and aversion to getting dragged in chime with what Shia-backed militias, Iran-backed militias are doing in the Syrian and Iraqi theater? We've seen a
you're hitting on a big issue right here, and that is, I think there is concern about the control over these Shia militia groups that are much smaller, have a lot less at stake in this, and may view this as the opportunity to strike a blow, to move themselves to a more prominent position in the Shia world here with this, and could take advantage of this situation. And in fact, I know we've seen the movement of organizations or portions of organizations like Asab al-Haq that have moved into the western part of Syria. We've seen organizations like Kataib Hezbollah, who I would not be surprised are largely behind these harassing attacks that are being launched against American installations and military posts in both Iraq and Syria. And of course, the Houthis. This shooting of missiles really up the length of the Red Sea is really concerning. And of course, they they have a very dominant control over, a key choke point, the Bab el Mandeb. So we should be really concerned about that. And I think that is, the aspect that does concern me a lot, is how the control over these types of organizations and them acting in a much more independent manner. I think we take it. We have a belief that Iran exercises some control, but I'm not so sure that control is as certain as we might expect. And so I am concerned about these organizations who could cause more problems. Probably not necessarily changing the character of the conflict in a overly substantial way, but they certainly could cause casualties. They certainly could provoke some more responses to something through their own actions.
All right, thank you, General. I mean, I'd love to come back to this issue of command and control, the IRGC Quds Force, and some of their proxies later on in this, if we do have some time. But at the moment, I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the U.S. capabilities in the region, how they might apply to be employed in a potentially realistic contingency. What are they authorized to do, and sort of how does that factor into sort of the Pentagon's broader global strategy, national defense strategy in terms of force allocation, modernization? What are we likely to see here in terms of deployment?
Yeah, my view on this and my observation, and I'm seeing a lot of the same things that you are, is that the United States, I think, at this point has a kind of a centrally top-driven decision-making cycle here. So most of the decisions about employment of force are going to be made in Washington, or certainly at the Pentagon, and then delegated down through CENTCOM to the operational commanders to take place. And that does not surprise me in a situation like this, where it is pretty complex, and they're trying to manage things, and not only support Israel, but also try to manage relations across the region, and a variety of threats that we've just talked about. So from a command and control standpoint, I think that's about where we are right now. I guess you can debate whether that's the right approach or not. I think we've got some very capable commanders who can manage the situation on the ground. But this is the way the president and the National Security Council want to orchestrate it, and I think that's fine, as long as they are actually involved in it and contributing to the decision makings. With respect to what the United States has deployed here, as many know, we've moved 2 carrier strike groups into the region, which is the first time in a long time that we've had 2 strike groups back in the region. Even as the CENTCOM commander, the most I ever had was 1, and then for the majority of the time I was CENTCOM commander, we did not have any that were in the region. So these really are our premier response capabilities. The carrier strike groups, each of those carriers with between 80 and 90 aircraft on them, can generate an extraordinary amount of combat power, can cover a lot of area, and can do it pretty darn quickly. So it's really at the leading edge of our deterrent capability here, in terms that you've seen some reporting. We have submarines in there. Again, that adds a little bit more, but it also beefs up some of our collection capabilities, so we understand what's going on. Of course, we move fighter squadrons and other things in there. I think what the purpose of all of these resources has really been to posture and once communicate to Iran and everybody else that, hey, we are here and we are prepared, and we've been able to match that capability for the most part with some of our narrative that that demonstrates kind of a willingness to use this. And again, we've struck just a couple times in the last week or so against militias, Iranian aligned militias who have conducted attacks against American installations. So we are kind of matching the willingness with the capability here, and that's an important aspect of it. But certainly, as I mentioned, really messaging the adversaries, messaging Israel that we are here, messaging the broader region that the United States is there, and taking active measures to deter a much broader conflict that would be devastating to the region, not just to us or anybody else, but to the entire region, and would disrupt a lot. So I think that's I think what we're doing. I would just add, oftentimes I think our listeners think about just posturing military equipment, but we've also done a good job posturing diplomatically. And I think that's been really important. I mean, the Secretary of State's been over there at least 3 times. The CENTCOM commander's been over there a couple of times. Secretary of Defense, the president went in the first 7 days. If that doesn't show a very clear U.S. focus on this and a desire to keep this in control, I don't know what does. And so I think we've done a good job posturing militarily and posturing diplomatically over the last several weeks, and hopefully we'll continue to do that as we move forward.
Even before October 7th, though, you were grappling both with these attacks by Iran-backed militias, but also by Turkey. And General Mazloum in Soleimani had a sort of close shave when that Turkish drone struck his convoy, and we've seen this repeated many times over, and huge damage to the civilian infrastructure there, as Turkey has kept up this sustained campaign of degrading that entity there. How concerned are you that, this is going to escalate on from the Turkish side as well? And ultimately, how sustainable is the US presence in Syria, given these attacks from multiple fronts, and of course the huge political pressure, diplomatic pressure that Turkey brings to bear, saying, I'm a NATO ally, you're in bed with terrorists, quote unquote. How do you see this going?
Well, yeah, I guess the way I see this is that I think our presence is sustainable, but I think we do have to remove uncertainty from the situation here. I don't think we can allow attacks against our troops in Syria or Iraq to go unanswered. And I think we have to hold people accountable. I was really glad to see last night in this most recent strike here, we actually went after what seemed to be some leadership or something else in the safe house, or however they characterized it there. But I think that's important. And I think that that responding to these things, I think, does remove the uncertainty associated with the situation, and makes those adversaries appreciate that there is a price to be paid if you do this, and we will not tolerate this. And I think if we can do that, if we can restore that, then I think we are back into a more sustainable presence in Syria and in Iraq. And of course, in Iraq, we also need to work very closely with the Iraqi government. We are there at their invitation, by the way. So they should bear some responsibility for quelling these types of threats against our troops. It's in their interest as well as ours as well. The situation with Turkey, again, is a really complex one, and one that I have found deeply frustrating for a long period of time. And I don't know that we will ever resolve this through any military aspect here. We've tried to orchestrate a large number of confidence building measures with the Turks. And certainly when the campaign was underway, we may be doing less of that these days. I assume we are. But we've tried a lot. Ultimately, this is going to take some kind of diplomatic and political solution here, which has been beyond our grasp for now, going on 5.5 years past the campaign of actually trying to, 4.5 years since the military campaign has ended. And we just have been unable to get to any kind of political solution that would guarantee rights and recognition for the Kurdish people of Syria, and provide them, the diplomatic and political protection that they require.
So, are you basically saying that the Biden administration hasn't been doing enough for the Kurds?
Well, it isn't. It's not just the Biden administration; it's everybody else. I mean, this is an international problem. The whole UN approach has collapsed on this. And we've just not been able to do much. There's not parties to this. Russia, Turkey, the Syrian regime, others have been unwilling to come to any kind of table here to have any kind of political discussion. I don't want to put it all on the United States. We bore a lot here in supporting the Kurds in this. I think it was in our interest to do that, and I certainly have a lot of time for this. But there's a lot of others, lots of others besides the United States that need to be paying attention to this.
Since we're speaking about the region sort of holistically, sort of a security approach and these political agreements, if we could, I wonder if we could zoom out generally. And I know when you were at CENTCOM, you worked on some of the discussions with some of the Gulf states on integrated air and missile defense. The Biden administration has pushed forward on the Abraham Accords, Arab-Israeli defense and security cooperation. What's the partnered angle here to this, potential for regional conflict? I mean, are the pieces in place for the U.S. and its local partners in the region to sort of sufficiently parry these long distance or long range, mid range attacks by Iran and proxy groups? You mentioned the attack by the Houthis based in Yemen, and what can we expect to see going forward on that?
Well, I think we were. I think we were on a path to getting there. I mean, the idea of integrated air defense is not a new or novel one that that I came up with. Everybody's been pursuing that, and a variety of other cooperative efforts in the region for a long period of time. And as a result of different political objectives, cultural issues, trust issues between partners in the region, this has escaped us to this date. I think the Abraham Accord has provided a good platform upon which to build on trust and confidence and good relationships. I mean, a year ago, we were seeing joint military exercises, combined military exercises with the Israeli and some of the Gulf partners, along with the U.S. as kind of the broker of that, taking place in both the air and the maritime environment. These are really important. There are good commercial links between these countries. These are important aspects as well. I am concerned that the current conflict, what's happening in Gaza right now, is taking that off track, and it'll have to kind of get back onto it. But yeah, I think that's a platform from which we can do this. Ultimately, this is about trust between all the Gulf partners in this, and that's oftentimes what has eluded our ability to create a more integrated air defense system or some other things right here. And so it takes a lot of time, and the Abraham Accords, I think, were providing a good platform for that. But I think it's probably a little bit off kilter right now as a result of the current conflict.
I was just going to follow up real briefly if I can. Sir, I was wondering if you see do you see there potentially being a point of U.S. involvement in this conflict, or not direct involvement, but support for Israel's campaign, an attempt to deter sort of wider conflagration? Do you see this as potentially eventually coming to a point which might have diminishing returns for Washington's goal of building a regional bulwark for security?
Well, yeah, I think so. I mean, we've got two carrier strike groups in the Mideast right now. I don't know that we're going to be able to sustain that indefinitely with our other commitments, particularly our commitments out in the Indo-Pacific area. We're going to have to rotate. We're going to have to move those things around. I think what we need to do is I do think we need to identify a sustainable level of force presence in the region that is there, that is sufficient enough to reassure our partners and protect our own interests. And I think that is something that we've struggled with identifying. I mean, we've run the whole gambit here, from literally hundreds of thousands of troops in the region to, what we had just prior to this, which was down in the 20s or 30s. Thousands of troops in the region. So we've got to find what the sustainable amount of force is and military capability that we need to have in the region. And I think our interests that we have here bear a commitment of military resources. I mean, we're still very concerned about, as we've been talking about, we're concerned about instability in the region. Instability here doesn't stay there. It affects our interests in other areas. We're concerned about terrorism. We've just seen a good example of it. We're concerned about the flow of commerce and resources coming out of the region. That's a vital U.S. interest. We're concerned about Iran's malign objectives, particularly with respect to proliferation of nuclear weapons and things like that. That's something that we want to want to prevent. And again, I think a positive influence by the United States in the region is in our interest. So I think we have to figure out what that is, and I think we can do that at the same time that we concentrate appropriately in other areas like the Indo-Pacific. I think we're big enough. I think we're a rich enough country that we can do this. We should be able to do this to protect our interests. So we've got to think long term in terms of how this fits together. And I think it's important for us to appreciate that what happens in the Middle East doesn't stay there. It's got to be part of a broader national security strategy that address our concerns in other areas as well. In many ways, these are all linked, largely because of the concerns about great power competition.
One final question, General. Very early on in the conflict, there was this idea that Hamas and ISIS are the same, and that's been propagated by the Israeli government. Are they the same?
I don't think they're exactly the same. I mean, some of their methods, the brutality of some of their tactics, I think is similar. They both control terrain and control and compel populations. They share that in an example. They both were driven by very virulent ideologies that were largely destructive in nature. So I think they have that in common. Where I see the differences is that Hamas, for better or worse, probably worse, has been recognized as the authority in Gaza for a number of years now, 15 plus years, and so they have had much more of an ability to embed in the population, to embed in the land, and that's different. That's physically different than what ISIS did. Now, ISIS took control of a large swath of area and embedded themselves in and married into the communities, things like that. But they had not done that for the length of time that Hamas had. Second of all, the population over which Hamas rules is different than the population over which ISIS ruled. That population that ISIS ruled was largely one that was subjugated. They didn't ask for this. They didn't recognize ISIS as any form of legitimate governance or anything else. I think that's different with the Palestinians. And while I won't try to broadly paint everybody in Palestinians, political viewpoints here. I mean, there were civilian agencies set up within Hamas that were purportedly there to represent the people and provide services and the aspects of government to them. That's a little bit different than to a population that recognized and needed that and looked that way. That was not necessarily the case there in with ISIS. So I think I see some similarities. I think there's some differences, but I think the real differences really are in the military operations. Just the situation for which Israel is dealing with right now in Gaza City, I think is actually much more complex than what we dealt with. There are layers of complexity. There are hostages. There are this huge humanitarian piece. There is the information environment, which is hyperactive right now, and there's a lot that is complicating this situation for them. So I think that makes it a much different situation.
Plus, Hamas is indigenous to
right. Yeah, exactly. The ISIS was largely foreigners who came from other places and subjected this on to them. Although they had some locals, the majority of their leadership, the majority of their fighters were in fact foreigners, and they brought their own wives. They did other things. I mean, it was really crazy how they tried to insert themselves into these communities out here. So.
And in terms of the prosecution of the war, obviously you had that partner force, the SDF.
That's right. So that's another big difference here. I mean, the way the United States fought this is we fought this by through an advise and assist campaign where we enabled the Iraqi security forces in Iraq and the Syrian Democratic forces in Syria as the forces who did most of the fighting and the dying, frankly. And then we provided the leadership, the unique capabilities, the intelligence, the fire support, and everything else they needed to do that. And I think did a pretty good job of it. So it was a different campaign for us. Israel is alone in this. They are waging their own fight here. They don't have partners on the ground that are carrying out their wishes or moving towards their objectives. They have to do this themselves.
Well, thank you so much, General, for giving us your time. And we look forward to hosting you again, perhaps in the...
Good. I look forward to it. And I wish you good luck on your travel here. Safe travels into the region.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Look forward to hearing more from you when you return.
Thanks, General. Thanks so much for joining us.
And this brings us to the end of another episode of On the Middle East. The General got to the heart of the matter, saying a political solution is ultimately what will resolve these conflicts, be it Israel's war against Hamas or Turkey's ongoing military campaign against the Kurds of Syria. Thanks for tuning in.